Welcome to the Strong Women's Club, episode number 86.
This is the Strong Women's Club, where successful women share their behind-the-scenes stories of how they got to where they are today. Join us.
Hi, everybody. This is Edie Berg. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And today's guest on the podcast is Ruth Messenger. Ruth was the president of the American Jewish World Service from 1998 to 2016, so almost 20 years. And she's currently still working there. She's the organization's inaugural global ambassador. And she had an incredible presidency there. Prior to that, she had a 20-year career in public service in New York City as a city council member and a Manhattan borough president. And to further let you know who I'm speaking with today, Ruth was named one of the 10 most inspiring women religious leaders of 2012 by the Huffington Post. She was voted the 6th most influential Jewish person in the world by the Jerusalem Post and was listed annually on the Forward's Forward 50 for almost a decade. So let's listen to Ruth Messenger's story now and my conversation with her and the work that the American Jewish World Service does, and then we'll talk about it after. Ruth Messenger, thank you so much for joining me on the Strong Women's Club podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Thanks so much. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, me too. So for a long time, let's talk about first your major work that you're doing, and then we'll talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you got to that point as well. So you were the president for many years of the American Jewish World Service for almost like 18 years. So really a good chunk of time. So you're still there. You're the inaugural global ambassador for the same organization. So this is a new position for you. So let's talk about what that organization is for whoever doesn't know about it, and then exactly what you're doing.
Sure. American Jewish World Service is a 31-year-old organization, about to be a 32-year-old organization, which is an organization that's motivated by core Jewish values, most particularly the mandate to pursue justice. And it works to expand human rights and end poverty in the developing world among key marginalized populations. So, just to clarify what we do, a great deal of our work is overseas, in 19 different countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And in those countries, through a whole process, we have identified and we work with about 500 different grassroots organizations led locally by people who are about protecting farmers' rights to land, or trying to ensure that young women are not married against their will before the age of 18, or are fighting to rebuild civil society after a conflict. I think the key issue here, we have several thematic areas. We also do work after disasters. But the key issue is that unlike many Western organizations, we find people who are already doing the work, and we support them largely with funding and the available work of our staff. We help them evaluate what they're doing and what successes they're realizing. But that's very different from what many organizations do, which is to send people to do the work. We don't do that. So we are a funder of grassroots social change leaders around the world, and we stay with organizations for a long time. And the only thing I would add to that is that we also do work, pretty logically, I guess, in the American Jewish community to make sure that the largest possible number of people know what we're doing and that they support us in pursuing policy changes in Washington that will be meaningful to the organizations that we support around the world. So stopping gender violence globally, fighting for LGBT rights around the world, changing U.S. policy on how it provides foreign aid. All of those things are decisions that are made in Washington, and we are a voice in Washington looking for those changes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me just get into the details a little bit. For example, maybe you can tell me a story of a time where, let's choose, I don't know, someplace in Africa. There are plenty of disasters and people who need help in Africa. So I know it's a huge, very, very wide thing. But let's hear one story of something that American Jewish World Service did there.
Okay, so I'll give you a current example. In Uganda, there is already legislation on the books against LGBT persons. And over the last now 7 years, there's been a struggle to literally punish LGBT activities by death. And we have, over that entire period of time, been a strong supporter of a network of small, different organizations representing different parts of that population, fighting first to stop the what's called the Ugandan anti-homosexuality bill from coming up in Congress and their parliament, then trying to stop the president from signing it. And when he did sign it, the Ugandan president signed it in 2014, we funded a legal aid group in Uganda, run by Ugandans, to bring a successful challenge against the law and get it thrown out. And we continue to work with all of those groups. That's one example. And let me just give you a very different example. Around the world, I'll speak right now about Central America, but many different places, we work with local farmers. These are people who are very poor, but they are subsistence farmers. They're able to grow enough food for their families and occasionally grow enough food to go to market, sell the food they've grown, and get some income. And in places all over the world, their land is being taken away from them by international mining companies, by water companies, by people wanting to build hydroelectric dams. They're literally flooding out communities of people, stealing their land, and appropriating it for purposes that do not help the people who live there. And in many, many different parts of the world, we are defenders of those natural resource rights, working with the local groups on each of the steps that they feel they need to take, whether those steps are actions of protest or efforts to go into court or whatever.
Okay, so how does it work? Who do you choose to go? Are they volunteers that go to work there? How long does each person spend in each place?
No. Our work is all work that's done by people who live there. The LGBT groups in Uganda have formed themselves. The legal aid group in Uganda is run by a man named Nicholas Opio. He's a trained Ugandan lawyer. He took this case on in the same way that American groups take on other cases. Mm-hmm. In the case of the farmers, similarly, there are many different farm associations. There also are local people who, I want to make a note here, at risk of death, take on organizing and protest. So we have a program staff in New York that knows about these groups. We have an in-country consultant, or 2 or 3 in any country where we work. Our staff finds the groups, figures out with the groups what's a reasonable budget, helps them figure out how to be accountable to us for the money that we give. But the work is being done by the people who live in these countries, who are the ones most seriously affected by what's happening.
Mm-hmm. So you're taking away the, like there's oftentimes a side that's a little patronizing or...
That's exactly
right. So you don't have that aspect at all. But do you provide training then to the local people other than money?
If that's what they think they need. I mean, we have very close relationships with these people, but you highlighted exactly what's special about our work, and I would connect that to Jewish values. We believe very seriously in the concept of B'Tselem Elohim, that every person is equally made in the image of God. We don't think the answers to subsistence farming and land rights in Guatemala are going to be made by people sitting in Geneva. We think it's the group on the ground that will tell us what they need. Now, you're correct. They may tell us that what they need is additional training. They may tell us what they need is some security advice, because they literally are being stalked by thugs. I mean, we have had land rights activists last year in Honduras murdered by people who eventually, it turned out, were hired by the hydropower dam company to go and murder our lead organizer, Berta Cáceres. But if people need security, if people need training, most often, that training, that help can be provided by another organization in their country. You use exactly the right word. It's a patronizing assumption that all answers to all world problems have to come from America. They don't. So it's working out what's needed, but it's working with the people on the ground. And I would mention that there's another Jewish value there, and that is not one that we all honor all the time, but it's the value of listening.
Well, so we're much better talkers than we are listeners. But
exactly, but we find what we believe in the concept of Shema, and we find a group that's doing extraordinary work. We'll say to them, tell us what's next most helpful. Oh, you want to fund a training program so that women know their rights and so and know where to escape if they are victims of domestic violence. Mm-hmm. Oh, you want to start a kind of human rights education program for 10, 11, and 12-year-old girls and boys that will cut against the practice of early marriage. Okay, we will take, we do a lot of investigation, but we like the way you're going. We see you as part of very often of building a social movement in your own country, of doing advocacy for your rights, and we're available to support you with the different kinds of help that you need.
Okay, so, and what is the Jewish aspect of this program? I know that you mentioned the Jewish values, which is kind of almost really just, I want to put it simply, it's really just being a good person, right? So it is, but we're very rooted in, so the most fundamental Jewish teaching, in fact, in the Torah, is to remember the other and to help the other and the stranger, to help the widow and the orphan, because remember our own circumstances. Mm-hmm. So all of our work is targeted to marginalized populations in the countries that we've designated. That's women and children, that's immigrants and refugees, it's persons with disabilities, it's LGBT activists. It covers a broad swath of the world, but that's our targeted population is, okay, what would it be like to be this organization in the Dominican Republic fighting against not just gender violence, but what happens to be quite common in the Dominican Republic, and that is literally the murder of women by their spouses and partners because they were acting up. Mm-hmm. So anyway, whatever the issue is, our first motivation is to work with the other and the stranger. Our second motivation, also rooted in Jewish values, is to do what we can to pursue justice. I've talked to you about the values that influence our work, the value of listening, the value of full respect and humility for the other person. And then the second whole swath of what's Jewish about our work, I mentioned very briefly before, and that is we educate about issues of global social justice in the American Jewish community. We take a cohort of 12 to 15 rabbis every year to be global justice fellows, to spend some time, in addition to their day jobs, to spend some time understanding our work, understanding how fundamental Jewish text applies to and informs our work, taking those rabbis to see our work in a particular country, most recently the Dominican Republic, where I was with rabbis a month ago with 14 rabbis, and then taking those rabbis, which I'll actually be doing next week, to Washington to speak to members of Congress and the State Department about what they've seen and about their interest in urging the U.S. government to get involved in an issue that the government may not, from our point of view, be sufficiently involved. Mm-hmm. Okay. Who funds you?
As many wonderful people as possible. We have small donors and large donors. We've grown tremendously in the last 18 years from being a $3 million organization to being a $36 million organization with large numbers of small gifts, with thankfully a couple of larger donors, some foundations, but basically the funding, is from people who like our approach to doing this kind of international human rights and development work, and to people in the Jewish community who have a global perspective.
Beautiful. Do you have any relationship with Israel?
We don't work in Israel because there are a very large number of Jewish organizations, obviously, in Israel and in the States that work on a range of different issues in Israel. Our mandate from our founding in 1985 is to work in a swath of the poorest countries in the world. That does not include Israel. So the only connections that we have to Israel are that we are aware of Israel as its own international player, and sometimes we work with the Israelis who are working in other countries.
Many times, yeah. It's so interesting. It's so nice to come across an organization like this that is non-judgmental, that very open to, from every direction, really, but particularly in who you're helping. So I appreciate that very much. Now, let's talk about you a little bit. Okay. So, although this organization is very interesting, and it's not a fly-by-night thing. I mean, as you said, it's over 30 years, so it's obviously working. So,
yeah, we think so.
Yeah. Okay. So where did you grow up? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Manhattan, which is where I raised my children and where I still live.
Oh, fantastic.
part of the New York Jewish community for many years. My mother worked in the Jewish community. I'm a social worker by professional training. And before I came to American Jewish World Service, I was in New York City politics.
Mm-hmm. So really you're an activist all your life.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. And your position now as global ambassador, what does that mean?
So I'm now, the most important thing is that we did a leadership transition at American Jewish World Service, and the organization is now run by Robert Bank, who was the executive vice president for the last 7.5 years that I was there. And I'm doing part-time work for him and AJWS as global ambassador. And that actually relates directly to a piece of the work that I described to you. It relates to our ongoing work with a cohort of rabbinic fellows, educating them in issues of global justice and representing our concerns in a variety of interfaith meetings, both in this country and abroad. So that's my current job with AJWS. And for the information of your listeners and for you, I'm doing other work on social justice in the Jewish community with a network of smaller organizations called the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable, and most recently as the Finkelstein Institute Social Justice Fellow at the Jewish Theological Seminary. So working with rabbinic students, graduate students in Jewish education on these issues of social justice.
Mm-hmm. Are there any Orthodox rabbis involved?
Absolutely. Our rabbinic cohort every year engages rabbis from all denominations, and we have several Orthodox rabbis, modern Orthodox rabbis, who have traveled with us at various points over the last decade and continue to be very alert to global issues of global social justice.
Fantastic. And I assume there are also female rabbis that travel with you.
Of course, yes.
Of course. So, right. So do you find any conflict in amongst yourself, those groups?
We find the usual, healthy discussion about what it means to be a rabbi today, what it means to do social justice in a congregation, how rabbis would like to be additionally educated to deal with some of these issues that they know they're going to confront when they're out there in the world. And, healthy discussion between and among our rabbi cohort each year is part of what makes it so strong and so satisfying for all of us who participate.
Yes. I think the people who are naturally drawn to participate in something like this all already come with an open mind, regardless of how they choose to celebrate the Judaism. But I think it's always helpful to gather around other people's suffering. So I don't mean to put it that way, but it's true that people will come out of all kinds of corners of the world to be able to help other people if you just ask them.
I think that's very true. And I think, as you picked up before, what we want to get across with anybody who works with us or even people who send us money is to understand that we don't have all the answers, but we know the people on the ground who do.
What part of the work do you most enjoy?
Oh, I love everything about it. It's what you said before. I'm an activist. I love everything about social justice work. And I'm really like making the connections, which I'm doing in my past job, in my current several jobs, between Judaism and social justice, because I think this is a core set of principles of Judaism, as I said, going back to Torah teaching, and then expressed in the last century, perhaps most eloquently by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said many wonderful things, but one of them was, in a free country where terrible wrongs exist, some are guilty, but all are responsible.
You have children and grandchildren. Are any of your children equally as socially aware?
I'm happy to say that all three of my children are equally socially aware. They cover the denominational gamut of Judaism. They are literally Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, and Modern Orthodox, and among their synagogue affiliations. I have 8 grandchildren, several of whom are also already social justice active in social justice. And yes, I'm very proud of them.
Yes, I think this is an important point in that we don't just influence the people that we're helping. I mean, in that we influence also our immediate our homes, the people in our homes, and
right.
and them to their children and to their spouses and to the school, whatever they happen to be working on. So it's really just by being a role model, as you are and have been, influences a much, much bigger puddle, like pool.
Yep.
Pool or lake, or I don't know what to say. This keeps going. The ripples keep spreading, even if you're working on one specific drop.
Right.
So tell me what you're most excited, what your project that you're working on now with another one maybe, and then we'll finish up.
Okay, well, in terms of the global ambassador work, I'm very excited because we are taking these 14 rabbis to Washington next week for 2 days of meeting with members of Congress and staff in the U.S. State Department. And this is about a particular issue in the Dominican Republic, which has to do, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but has to do with the sad effort by the government of the Dominican Republic to expel and to render stateless Dominicans of Haitian descent, people who have lived in the Dominican Republic for 2 or 3 generations, but the government of the Dominican Republic has decided that they should not have full citizenship benefits and that they should go back to Haiti. And I mentioned that. Yeah. And I mention this particularly because statelessness is a serious issue in the history of the Jewish people. We know what that means. And so it's a very powerful issue for us to engage on. So that's one thing I would mention. And the other thing I would mention is that as the new social justice fellow at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is in New York on 122nd Street and Broadway, we are working with the faith communities in that part of the city. So in Harlem and Morningside Heights, there are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and interfaith organizations, and we will come together right before Easter and Passover to do a press conference and a demonstration, and then some ongoing collaboration around the themes of racial justice, welcoming the stranger, and religious tolerance.
Oh, so exciting. That's so exciting. It's a good time to be doing it. It's always a good time to be doing it, but
That's right.
but it's exciting to be part of something like that. Fantastic. So do you have anything else that you'd like to say?
No, I think you know a lot now about what I'm doing, and I love the work.
Yes, I can tell on you, and it's energizing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and you are making the world a better place, which is what this program is all about, too. So thank you so much for your work and for talking to us. Ruth Messenger, thank you for coming on to the Strong Women's Club podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Ruth Messenger for coming onto the show today. Both Ruth and the American Jewish World Service are impressive, of course. There are a lot of people who care about what's going on around them, but not a lot of people who will actually go and do something about it. One of the people who is definitely doing something about it is Ruth Messenger. What's even more impressive maybe about Ruth is her very long career. And she has children and she has grandchildren now. And she's still working as hard as ever, building new programs, finding people, vulnerable people all over the world that need their organization's help. Now, this organization, the American Jewish World Service, is also something I felt that it was important to spend quite a lot of time talking about today because, as I had said in the interview, it's a non-judgmental and non-patronizing organization. So looking for people all over the world, no matter what religion they are, no matter what country they happen to live in, and looking to see how they can help. Now, what's important is how they are actually helping them. For example, if you are in a work situation, let's say you have a few employees, and you see that they're not able to make deadlines, one way to go about helping them, perhaps, or getting them closer to reaching their deadlines would be to say, I can see that you're not reaching your deadlines. Here are some ideas. Why don't you come into the office half an hour earlier, stay over on the weekend, maybe take a shorter lunchtime, or, cut out Facebook, or do any kind of measures that you think will actually help them use their time more wisely. That might work, that might not. But my guess is that their reaction to that will be, I already spent so much time on this. You're not helping me in any way. They'll have some kind of an antagonistic reaction to what you had said. On the other hand, if you had come to your employees and said, look, I can see that you're not meeting your deadlines and we need to meet our deadlines. How can I help you to meet your deadlines? What can I do to help you? What do you need? Now, the reaction to that is going to be totally different. It's going to be, what we really need is a new piece of software, Or what we really need is, I need my office to be quieter. I can't concentrate when I can hear other people talking. Or what I really need is, earphones or something that you had no idea, didn't come to your mind. It was their idea. And if you provide what they're asking for, you get a couple of different positive results. One is you might be actually meeting your deadlines. Two, you have a different kind of perhaps dialogue with your employees. So I'm saying this because this is exactly what the American Jewish World Service has done with the people that they're helping. They're not coming in and saying, this is the help that we're going to give you. They're asking them, what kind of help do you need? It's an entirely different dialogue, far more effective and far more empowering. So thank you so much for joining me today. Please share this podcast with 2 or 3 friends. Go ahead and help them find where the podcast is on their phones. Show them how to subscribe. Tell them why you like this podcast and maybe other podcasts that you enjoy. And there's so many fantastic, incredible shows that I listen to. I listen to all the time. And I'm sure that you do too. And that would be a great thing for you to do for your friends or for your family members or for your kids or for your parents. And also a great thing that you can do for this show, help the word get out and help us to grow. So have a really strong week, everybody. Thank you so much again for listening. Litrot.